Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Oh, good evening, Mr. Moderator. Nice to see you.
Yes, sir. Nice to see you as well. Before we go on, apologies for last week. I think the internet masters were at their work, but hopefully we'll have a better outing this evening. Thank you so much, sir. Sir, let me start with Africa this week. I know just last week before we got cut off, we were talking about the South African president Cyril Ramaphosa and his visit to the United Kingdom, the first foreign leader to be on a state visit to King Charles III. But for a very different reason, he's back in the press today following the case of $2 billion that's been found in his farm in South Africa. How do you react to that news, first of all, sir, on South Africa?
Well, I don't want to rain on anybody's parade. As you rightly pointed out in your intro, I thought we discussed positively about his visit to the United Kingdom, the state visit. You see, whatever happens to South Africa happens to all of us. Don't forget how many, what we lost. When I say we Africans, what we lost, the price we paid for freedom for South Africa. We lost, well, at least definitely, we have, I'm sure of one head of state, Samora Machel, president of Mozambique, when the South Africans went to change the landing beacons. And so his plane flew into the side of a mountain instead of, aligning its landing gear and it's improved after the apartheid struggle was over. That it was the intelligence agents in South Africa, apartheid South Africa, that tampered with the landing beacons. How do you want the soul of that man to feel when 3 of South African presidents have been removed from office for corruption? Thabo Mbeki, Zuma, and now a judicial panel has found Cyril Ramaphosa guilty of what, not to put too fine a point on it, a criminal liability and infringement of constitutional values. What does this say about we Africans? And maybe let's get the facts, clear here, because it will even shock people, the details of the, of this particular thing. After he became president, on his private farm, some burglars went in and treated themselves to $500 million that were found in currency on the farm. Now, they were caught. The issue was handled in-house. The police were not brought in to investigate officially in order to have prosecution. Everything was hushed up. What's $500 million doing in cash on the farm of president of a country? What? And don't forget, before he even became president, there was a scandal about the mining company of which he was a non-executive director, where the police opened fire on demonstrating African workers who were demonstrating for better wages and what have you. What is saddening about this case is that, see, South Africa was a shining beacon for all of us Africans. And maybe I shouldn't even be too local, because I remember demonstrations around Trafalgar Square, demonstrations in the United States, demonstrations in Europe, not to talk about demonstrations in Africa as part of the struggle against apartheid. Black, white, yellow, whatever have you, were united in associating with this cause. You know, it was like all of a sudden in the world, here we are. We have found something positive, something pure that could unite all of us. And that this was the anti-apartheid struggle. And Mandela, of course, you know, was the figure, the epitome of this. And now what? Please don't get me, I don't want our colleagues to get me wrong. The South Africans are not worse than any of us. It's just that the South Africans, instead of sweeping theirs under the rug, they are frontally confronting issues of etiquette, issues of corruption at high places. In other countries, we will sweep it under the rug. It will not even see the light of day. And here one must admire, call out positively the judiciary in South Africa, who have the courage to speak justice to power, to hold the feet of their presidents to fire and challenge them. In other countries, well, only God knows if those judges will still be alive. So I am not calling up negatively South Africa. In fact, one should praise them for frontally confronting the issues of executive probity. But nevertheless, it is disheartening that purity in ANC could not have metamorphosed into purity in governance. And my own reading of the situation is that on the eve of the transition from apartheid government to government by the ANC, the white establishment set a trap for them, for the elite, the ANC leaders, and they fell into that trap. And what was the trap that they set for them? You guys are poor. You've been in the bush or you've been in exile. You have nothing to show for all the struggle you've gone through. Know what? We'll settle you. You'll be black faces on white business boards. Houses, mansions will be made available. Shares that you didn't pay for will be made available to you. And then you'll be comfortable. That way, you will not tamper with the business, the way we run business, the way that it is. And they fell for it. The only one person who resisted was Chris Hani, who at that time was Secretary General of the South African Communist Party, and he was assassinated. Now, all these things that I'm saying are not my imagination. Remember, when problems started with Zuma, he came out with all of these things. He said, you guys were settled, but those of us who were in the bush, whom you sent to face the Buthelezi party in Zululand and everything, you didn't bring us into the settlement. And that was why when Zuma came in, he found some Indian partners. He said so himself, he told us. So I'm not making up stories. And as of now, look at what is happening in Angola. Look at what is happening in Mozambique. Again, in the case of Mozambique, 29 leaders, elite. I'm not talking about Yahoo boys. I'm talking about important personalities in Mozambique have just been found guilty by a judge who said he's going to take him 1 week to read the 1,398 pages of his judgment to know the punishment that he was going to impose. In Angola, on trial are again members of the elite, including the son of a former president, Dos Santos. While yesterday, Interpol issued a red alert for his daughter, again for corruption. What is it about us in Africa that we rain on our own parade? What is it? Now, I mean, don't let me make a collective judgment on all of us, because When Kaunda left office, I don't think he had up to. Kenneth Kaunda was the president of Zambia. Yes, Zambia. I don't think he had £1,000 in his account. When Mwalimu Julius Nyerere left office, he went back to his village, to the house he built when he was just a headmaster. So there are shining beacons that we can point to. But I mean, out of 56 head of states, for us not to be able to point to 75% as being clean, no, it is very disheartening, extremely disheartening. Now, I don't know what is going to happen. They are saying, I'm sorry, I know you want, I'm taking the response for too long, but people are expecting that Ramaphosa may resign tonight, that is going to address the nation, but he has been found guilty by that judicial panel. It's either he then decides to go on trial or goes for impeachment in their National Assembly. The other alternative, of course, is the ANC could sack him at their convention coming up this month, actually, in December. Or the fourth is he could resign and save South Africa the topsy-turvy that may happen over the issue.
So I'm sure that our viewers would be asking the question here. Corruption is not new, but why is it that in Africa we've still not been able to find a solution to the problem? Why is it in Africa? The young ones are agitating that let's get into government, let's get a new government in place, new names, new faces in place to address this issue of corruption. But again and again, the cases keep coming up. And somehow, the leaders avoid the right level of prosecution. How do we avoid it?
Well, I mean, you've given an answer to your own question. The issue of corruption is not handled frontally. And please don't bring in this young versus old. There is a saying in Nigeria, the young grows old. If you take 1999 as the cutoff point, when we went back to civilian democratic rule, out of 36 governors, I will say maybe about 25, if not more, were in their 30s. In their 30s. Now, how many of them have clean hands? Apart from the fact that the three presidential candidates that we have in Nigeria now were actually all involved in the 1999 transition to democratic rule. So they refused to hand over. They refused to transmute and let the younger ones from under them. But they don't have clean records. But the answer you yourself have given it, it is because we don't confront corruption frontally. Those who are corrupt, we don't punish them. We let them go. And they have then, in the process, corrupted the police who should investigate them, corrupted the judiciary that should try them and do justice by the facts presented before them. The whole system has now become corrupt. But I was listening to a lecture by Professor Lumumba 2-3 days ago, and he was in Nigeria here. He was warning those in power that don't forget that there is a tomorrow after power. That presidents do lose office, that prime ministers do lose office, and that when push comes to shove, they face the consequences of their malfeasance while they are in office. These are not my words. These are the things that he said. Yes, it may take some time before it becomes so glaring to us. But Rawlings, executed, I think, 5 former heads of states when he took over. Some Supreme Court judges in Ghana, were assassinated under circumstances that were still not clear, to us today. And don't forget the kinds of things that led to revolutions in Russia, in China, and in all those places where people who had held office were then held to account. We should be careful. Africa is not going to be any different. It may take time. The wheels of justice do run slow, exceedingly slow, but they do run.
Thank you, sir. Let's talk about Ghana, sir, because some time ago we talked about, and I think on this program, we talked about Ghana and some of the developments that we were seeing in Ghana. I think there was a US presidential visit, and we were talking about why Ghana, not Nigeria at the time, and that Ghana seems to be moving ahead. But recently, we're now hearing the news that Ghana may be running into economic challenges in terms of potentially defaulting on some of their commitments as a government. In addition to that, we're still hearing that the United Kingdom, for example, might be trying to move their forces away from the whole Sahel region and move them to Ghana. What sort of challenge is this going to present for not just Ghana, but all the countries that had been thinking Ghana was the destination to go to, and suddenly they may be faced with this issue of an economic challenge that Ghana may have to deal with?
Bad decisions by those in power. When Kufuor, the present president, was running for office, he said he promised God that if he was re-elected, he was going to build one of the largest churches in the world. And now he's built a cathedral that cost $450 million from public funds. And this money has been withdrawn from the treasury at a time when the whole world is going through financial difficulties. So it's not as if all of a sudden he set up a project with then generated funds to make him fulfill his vow to God. No, it was right at the time when the resources of Ghana itself were going through rather hard times, like the rest of us. And instead of tightening his belt, he went in for that kind of extravaganza. The same Ghana, the same Kufuor who has said during his state visit to France when he first got to power, Africa does not need aid. We have enough resources in Africa, and we will rely on our own resources. Now, as you said in your intro, the IMF has just, these financial institutions that grade bonds and debts have just, reduced Ghanaian bond to junk bond, which means it's almost on the verge of defaulting on payment on his loans. Bad judgment, misapplication of funds. And this is something that, again, all African leaders are guilty of. You could see the signs of rain about to break out, and yet that's when you still decide you are going to wash and put your clothes on the line. You could see the foreign exchange income going down, and instead of tightening your belt at the sign of that, that's when you decide on big projects. When you start borrowing money to pay salaries, that is, it's not rocket science. Immediately, you should know that good loans are used for capital projects that will generate resources that will enable you to pay the loans. But borrowing loans to pay salaries, that's a no-no. It should get 0 over 100 if that is what to propose as an answer to a question in economics. And when you look at the things that the present administration in Ghana has done, especially since he came back into office, you will see all the signals of bad judgment, bad financial judgment.
So one thing that's also happened in the course of the week is that the International Labour Organization released a report where they said that real wages had declined by 0.9% in the first half of the year. But more importantly, the United Nations, in responding to that, has then started to warn governments of the likelihood of social unrest. And some of the points we've talked about on these corruption cases only fuel those sorts of things. But my question is this, is it the place of the UN to be warning governments about the possibility of social unrest? Isn't that likely to be a trigger point for those who wanted to riot and go out for violence on this kind of issues?
No, some of us actually think that the UN has been rather slow in issuing the warnings because the dislocation, the disparity in wealth between the rich and the poor are also so evident that there have been strikes in and riots in France all through the first term of Macron. Now in England, the railways on strike, postal workers on strike, nurses. I'm not sure when was the last time nurses went on strike in Great Britain, but they are being called out on strike. Apart from that, right-wing governments are now coming into power in all parts of the world. You have a right-wing government in Great Britain now that even by the standards of the Conservative Party is very right-wing. In the United States, the Republicans have just taken hold of the House of Rep, and the Democrats are hanging on by the skin of their teeth in control of the Senate. Look at the new government in Italy. So the UN is just stating the obvious. And the moment you start seeing demonstrations, strikes, riots that are engineered because of one, falling low wages, inability of wages to keep in step with inflation, and the rich. Of course, the rich never suffer. They always manage somehow, not only to keep afloat, but to even get richer, while the poor are getting poorer. I mean, one of the things I cannot understand, and let me quickly say, I'm not a financial expert, so whoever wants to correct me, please feel free. Oil companies are making bumper profits, and instead of taxing those bumper profits so that you don't have to charge the poor high energy prices. No, you don't touch the profits, all on the grounds that will encourage them to invest back into the economy. You see, trickle-down economics has never worked. It has never worked. Margaret Thatcher tried it. She destroyed the society in Britain into atomistic individuals who only feel for themselves. Me alone. The rest, well, may God take care of them. I mean, why? Biden, I don't know how many times he will say so, that the 1% of American population who are billionaires, some of them don't even pay income tax. If you have a clever lawyer, you get away without paying income tax. And yet the poor, teacher or the poor truck driver, if he doesn't pay, the IRS comes after him and he's going to jail. But the rich, they don't pay and they get away with it. For how long do you think society will be able to accommodate this? Especially since I cannot see the end to the Russian-Ukrainian war. And for politicians, oh, this has come at a good time for them. They have something to blame. Russia-Ukrainian war. That is why, energy prices are going up. Russia-Ukrainian war. That's why there's no bread for the poor. And Ukrainian-Russian war. That is why there is drought, there is flood, there is this, there is that. I mean, if there's anyone in the world, even the blind, whom just put to the feet, they can feel the rush of flood. So they know what is happening with climate change. And yet, the conference that they've just said in Sheikh el-Sheikh in Egypt, they did not even reconfirm the commitments they made in Glasgow. I know there were new ones about reparation for damages to the global south, but they didn't put a figure to it. Instead, it now became an excuse for them to go back to coal and turn on nuclear generators and all what have you. Politicians will always be politicians. And I think the UN was quite right. If you listen to Akinyemi, the president of the African Development Bank, he at least has been warning African governments about the pattern of their spending and budgetary allocations which are not addressing the main issues of development in Africa. He's been doing so for at least the past 2-3 years that I've been following his activities.
So there's a question here, which is an interesting one. Someone is saying that I will paraphrase this. Someone is saying that the royal family is facing a bit of a challenge at the moment after a senior member has had to resign. A senior member of the organization or establishment, I should say, over the fact that she asked someone what country she really came from repeatedly. And the question this person is asking is, if the royal family was quick to respond to that case, do you think that they should also be distancing themselves from the South African president, given the proximity of his visit and this issue that has now come out?
Well, on this program, at times, you are the diplomat, while I'm the plain speaking professor. You are talking about the godmother of Prince William, Prince of Wales, heir to the throne. The godmother embarrassed Ngozi Fulani, who was in Buckingham Palace on invitation because she runs an NGO that is of interest to the Queen Consort. And repeatedly, he kept asking the kind of question that the average English person used to ask in the 1940s. From which of our colonies are you from? They couldn't believe that any person of color could be born in Great Britain. Now, you could excuse those asking that kind of question in the 1940s. But after the scandal of the issues raised by Meghan and Harry, that in 2022, in the palace, you couldn't possibly consider that somebody of color was British, born in Britain. You wanted that to say she was from some bush in Africa. That was the answer she was expecting. And when she didn't get that, she kept insisting. No, I'm not asking. Now, but the question you raised to me, I wouldn't even bother because it has crossed my mind because this case about Ramaphosa has been on for about 2 years. So they know it. And to that extent, the question I will ask is, why? Then did you invite the man when you know there is this issue that is hanging there? Was that to embarrass King Charles III? Was that bad advice? Was that illiteracy on their part, or what? I don't know. But the cross in South Africa is for Cyril Ramaphosa to carry. It's not for King Charles III to carry. But I think it simply shows the racism that is still endemic, honestly, not only just in Britain, but in Europe. There is no way at all that somebody of color will be regarded as Briton or French, or probably the only place he will be regarded is the United States, which is an immigrant nation in any case. Americans come from all over the place. So even if I step off the plane today in New York and I speak with my village accent, it wouldn't even bother them because how many accents do they hear in the United States? But if I go to China, there is no way, even if I were born in China, that I will be regarded as Chinese. No way. So it's not just even a British disease. It's a disease of non-African nations. There's no way that they will, possibly consider you. But in the palace, she should, maybe we should start running a training session for the palace, honestly.
Sir, but let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, sir. Some people have said that it is political correctness gone mad because people, a lot of people ask the question, where are you from? If someone asked me, where are you originally from? I wouldn't have considered that an offensive question or attributed any racial intonation to the question. I would happily have said, oh, Nigeria. How do you respond to that, sir, if you look at it from that point of view?
Well, partially because we Nigerians are, an arrogant, pompous, self-confident chap that we don't care what question you ask, we feel that's your problem. But for people born in Great Britain who suffer, you see, you have a home to come back to. But if you are a third generation Briton, born there, your parents born there, and you have children born there, and you are still being asked that question that implies you are not one of us. You don't belong. It was a whole style, and especially after she has answered about 3 times, she still continued to insist on on that question, it's only when you've been a victim of a syndrome that you then understand where the questioner is coming from. She knows what she was saying. You have been rejected. What are you even doing in the palace? Who invited you to the palace? And I mean, I, as a student, if you like, I was a beneficiary of this, in the sense that coming from Nigeria, where I was never tossed out of a restaurant, I was never asked to get off a SAPAS bus, where for you young people, SAPAS was the public transportation bus that we had at that time. I never experienced discrimination before I got to the United States. And when I then got there and started experiencing it, it really didn't, its impact on me was minimal, because I knew I was going back home. When I came here to get a degree, and that's not, but for a Black American who even with a PhD will still not be accorded all the civilities and rights that he was entitled to under the Constitution, it hurt them more than it hurt me. I shrugged it off and went my way. But not if you were, as I said, a Briton. You wouldn't be able to shrug it off.
Thank you for that, sir. Next time it happens, I would maybe call it out as well, and hopefully someone put it in the press that Nigerian-born technologist has been called a name, and we'll see where that goes to. Thank you, sir. Let me go to Saudi Arabia. This is an interesting one. Saudi Arabia is going to be hosting a Chinese Arab summit next week. And it is expected that they would be signing, China would be signing agreements on security, on energy, on investments there. How does that change the balance in the Middle East if this summit were to really go ahead there and all these agreements are signed?
Well, I thought that I had just this year stumbled onto the realization that we're moving into a new world order. But Professor Bolaji Akinyemi had been drumming it into my head that for the past 4 or 5 years, I have been talking about this issue of a new world order. The Chinese Arab Summit and the fact that it is being held in Saudi Arabia, which is the most conservative of the Arab countries, and that they are going to be signing agreement, is a manifestation of this new world order that I've been talking about. The world is changing. There are new prominent actors, and nations are readjusting their positions so that they can find a voice at the table. Even a more, a scandalous development today was that the UAE United Arab Emirates has invited the most right-wing politician in Israel to come and enjoy their national day with them. This is a man who has been found guilty even by Israeli courts of encouraging terrorism against Palestinians, against Arabs. He's found his way now into likely to be the Minister of Security, who will be in charge of the police, etc., under Netanyahu's new government. The UAE has invited him to come. So how do you interpret that? The world is in a flux, and nobody wants to be left out by clinging to old alliances. There are several indications of disagreements between Saudi Arabia and the United States. And Saudi Arabia is not going to be a supplicant at the table of waiting for the United States, to accept its changing profile. China is interested in that. China wants to establish a presence not only in the Middle East, but among the Arabs. And that's the context within which this summit is going to be held.
So there is a question here, and this one relates to the, let me see if I can phrase this right. This one relates to the role of Kenya and the likelihood that they're about to extend their laws on dealing with refugees. I think we talked about it a while ago in terms of Rwanda. I think we discussed Rwanda at the time when the UK was planning on sending people to Rwanda. But now Kenya is about to change their laws, expanding the laws on refugees in there. And the question that some analysts are asking is there anything we can pick up? Is Kenya about to become a role model? And have your views changed from what you thought about Rwanda then and Kenya's situation?
You've asked me 3 or 4 questions put together. Let me tease them out. And please, if I forget 1 or 2 questions, do remind me. Now, first of all, the new law already ratified by Parliament is that a refugee in Kenya will now have the right to citizenship, to acquire citizenship, a right to employment, a right to education within the community, and he or she does not have to live in a refugee settlement. Now, and that is distinct from the issue of Rwanda, where non-Africans, because basically the refugees you are talking about in Kenya are Africans. They are Somalis. They are refugees from the DRC. They are refugees from the neighboring countries. Whereas in the case of Rwanda, it's refugees that are going to be flown in from England. They are not going to be Africans. They are going to be Iraqis, Syrians, Afghanistans, who are going to be flown in. So there is a distinction there. My problem with talking about Kenya as a model is that I thought practically all African countries are generous towards refugees. Definitely in Nigeria, we don't even have refugee camps. We have internally displaced camps that came about because of the security problems that we have in certain parts of Nigeria. Basically, I don't even know, because I don't want to personalize things. But in Nigeria, we have had a president who was Tuareg, because his father was Tuareg, and that's Yaradua. We've had our present president is first generation from Niger. What's his name? Abacha. In fact, there's a village in Chad called Abache, and his people called Abacha came from there and settled in Nigeria, joined the army, and he became a Nigerian head of state. One of the vice presidents, before I go to that one, a vice president in Nigeria, half of his family come from Cameroon. They still live in Cameroon. And I think his uncle is actually, in fact, the chief of his own people in Cameroon. One of the vice presidential candidates now, his father came from Mauritania. So I don't find, maybe Kenya has been hostile towards refugees from the neighboring countries, but it's not an African tradition. You go in, you come out, and we have Ghanaians living in Nigeria, and we have Nigerians living and trading. In fact, in any case, under ECOWAS treaty, you have, if you're a citizen of an ECOWAS country, you have the right to migrate to another ECOWAS country, reside there, trade there, work there, presumably married there. So I don't know, what is, so why, you see, again, it's the Western press, foreign press, latch onto this kind of thing and then start trying to formulate the debate. To me, as an African scholar, I don't find anything unique in what Kenya is about to do. That's not to say I don't appreciate hospitality towards refugees, but all African countries, Africans regard other Africans as their brothers. We don't do the kind of thing they do in Europe, where, and even in Europe, they are starting to change. Boris Johnson, grandfather, was from Turkey. And I don't need to tell you about your present prime minister. So there's nothing unique as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. I've taken you a few minutes over time, but I was going to be careful how I responded to your last comment about our prime minister before I am regarded as making an offensive statement. So, I still live on this side of the fence. I don't want to be accused of speaking negatively of our leader, so I don't end up somewhere. I want to be back here next week. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you to our viewers for being here. We do appreciate your time. We will be back here next week, but when we come back, next week we'll talk about the Christmas period and the break, because I know quite a lot of people are traveling and maybe traveling around that time, but we'll talk about it next week. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Good night, sir.